Yo, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of the It's Needed podcast, where we discuss real issues involving law enforcement in the community. It's your boy Ryan Tillman, founder of Breaking Barriers United, and I am not joined today by the one and only Mr. Oh No, it's a Popo. It is a sad day. Today's going to be a different episode, guys, because one, I'm not joined by my boy AJ, and the reason I'm not joined with him today is because he did finally have his baby, and so him and his wife are celebrating the birth of his new baby. And fair or foul, is it fair or foul that I asked AJ to actually join me on the podcast tonight, even though he just had his baby 2 nights ago? So I'm sure he's gonna say foul when he gets back. But hey, guys, the baby is healthy, and so shout out to my brother because I'm so excited. My nephew is born. And so that's why he's not joining me tonight. And then what's also weird is that the Savage over here, he's here today. He is in the building, but he had to step out and he's on the phone because if some of you guys don't know, when the Savage is not recording for me, he's actually out recording weddings and doing different things like that. And so he actually has a phone call with a future bride to discuss what she wants for her wedding. So the Savage just stepped out of our brand new studio. So we have a brand new studio. I have recorded here once, but we actually, it's for the most part almost done. We got a nice accent wall going, got some new chairs going, as you guys can see. Got a nice little coffee table over here. So it's officially up. But what's weird is I'm up in the studio by myself today. Like, I feel kind of lonely. I'm like, so everybody just wants to leave me when I get up in my own studio. So, but it's going to be a different one, but it's still going to be a good podcast, guys. I promise you. It's a little weird because I feel like I'm talking to myself. It's just me and the camera tonight. But it's all good. We did not want to let another week go by with you guys missing another episode of the podcast. So, and that being said as well, one of the other things I wanted to discuss is me, AJ, and the Savage have officially talked about getting you guys an episode for the podcast every week. So, as you guys know, we currently do every other week, but with us having an official studio and you guys continuing to support our podcast, I think it's only right for us to increase the episodes. So sounds like we should be moving to about another episode every week. So I don't know when we're going to start that, but it's going to be coming soon. Shout out to you guys. If you guys enjoy this podcast, please give us a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, whatever it is. Go ahead and do that for us so that way we can keep it running. So let's get into the podcast. What am I going to do since I'm all alone, all by myself? Yeah, y'all probably did not like that, but that's how I feel right now. I'm going to have to have Billy edit that song into this podcast with some crickets because there's nothing but crickets in here. But you guys might ask, what am I going to get into today? What am I going to discuss today since I'm all by myself? So what we're going to do is I've actually had a few people reach out to me with some questions about an assortment of different topics. Not only that, I have a really good friend of mine who I work with. He's a partner of mine, and his wife is doing a project. And for her project, she had to ask a police officer 4 or 5 different questions. And so as a favor to him, I'm going to answer the questions for her. But I figured it would probably be good for the audience to hear because a lot of the questions she has are good questions just in general. So I'm going to mix some of her questions in with an assortment of questions that I've gotten from the audience. But before we do that, I want to discuss some current events. And so what are the current events that are going on in the life of Ryan Tillman? Well, it's been an amazing last month and a half, specifically last 2 weeks. You guys will notice I am wearing my typical It's Needed shirt, but you will notice I'm wearing a different hat tonight. And the hat I'm wearing is the official Ferris State University hat that I received when I went out to go speak to Ferris State criminal justice students about 2 weeks ago. So it was a phenomenal experience, and I have to give my boy Brendan a shout out from Ferris State University who put the event on. So what they did is they have a 5-star event that they actually host every 4 times a year, I believe, and they picked me to do one of the 5-star events. And so I had the privilege of going to speak to about 240 some odd criminal justice students. And according to them, the feedback was phenomenal. They said, I talked to Brendan the other day, and he said he's still been getting feedback. And so I wanted to give them a personal shout out. So I'm repping the hat that my boy gave me when I went out there. And not only that, when I went there, before I actually spoke, they gave me a tour of the Jim Crow Museum that they have on campus. And when I want to tell you how much of a humbling experience it was phenomenal because it really put things into perspective for me as a young African-American male and the things that I'm able to do now. It's just crazy. If you don't know what Jim Crow laws are, they were laws put in place back in the day that restricted African Americans from doing specific things. And one of the worst things about those laws, which I found out when I was at the museum, is that they had a list of laws of things that African Americans couldn't do, but as if you were Caucasian, if you're a white male or white female, whatever it was back in the day, if you saw an African American male or African American in general doing something that you did not appreciate, then you were able to basically take the law into your own hands and create a punishment for them, even if there wasn't a law written in the books. And so they were actually saying it was actually better to have broken a law that's actually written down than to do something that displeased somebody of the Caucasian race, because that person could basically take the law into their own hands and do what they wanted to do. So it was a very sad experience, but at the same time very humbling, because I recognize how far we've come as a country. And, if we look at our society today, and even though it's so divided, you have Democrats, you have Republicans, you have independents, you have people that are just so far removed from reality. It's just kind of hard to watch. But then if you look back to where we come from, our history, we have moved forward, and we are going to continue to move forward. And this podcast is evidence of that. So shout out to Brendan for having me out to Fair State University. Again, it was great. And if you do go to school at a college or whatever, I want you guys to know that if you guys would like to have me out, please email me at info@breakingbarriersunited.com, and we'll get out there. We did a presentation called what was it called? Shoot, I can't even remember what it was called. Oh, it's called Perception U. I forgot what it's called. It's called Perception U, and that presentation is geared at obviously changing the perception of law enforcement and getting you guys to think a little bit about more how we do our job. So shout out to Brendan, and I also want to give a shout out to Melissa Batty out of Oakland. So when I left Michigan, that 10-degree weather, which was oh so terrible, and I feel sad for anybody that lives on the East Coast, because that weather was terrible. Soon as I left Michigan, I actually flew into Oakland because I did a presentation. I did 4 presentations, as a matter of fact, with about 40 to 50 young kids out in Oakland the very next day on a Saturday. And so shout out to Melissa Batty from Oakland Police Department, who got me out there to present to those kids. That was also a phenomenal experience. Those kids come from some rough situations, but if you're one of those kids that are listening to this podcast, shout out to you guys. You guys are going to go out there. You guys are going to change the world. You guys mean the world to me. And so that was just another phenomenal experience. And so, we are moving in the right direction. I've been in the last month and a half, 2 months, I've been to Colorado, I've been to Florida, I've been to Michigan, I've been to Oakland. I'll be going back to Michigan and going to Sacramento soon. And so it's only because of you. So thank you for that. Some of the other current events that have been going on is, as we all know, we haven't done a podcast recording since the passing of Kobe. Actually, the last time we did a podcast recording was the day that Kobe actually passed. And so a lot has happened since then. But I just wanted to give you guys a reminder that one of the questions, and this actually kind of gets into the first question of the day, somebody DM'd me and said, do you think God forgives people? And what does that have to do with Kobe Bryant? Well, what it has to do with Kobe Bryant is that, life is so short and life is very fragile. And I think I've said that before. I've gone on many death investigations as a police officer, and I noticed how fragile life is. And so to answer that lady's question about does God forgive, God will definitely forgive you, even the worst of the worst. If you go to scripture and you look at the Apostle Paul, well, the Apostle Paul, before he became the Apostle Paul, was known as Saul, and Saul killed thousands of people that believed in God and stuff like that. And that guy, Saul, ended up becoming the greatest apostle, if you ask me, of the Bible. And so God will definitely forgive you. All you have to do is just ask him. God is there for you. God will be there for you even in the worst moments of your life, even though it may not seem like it. He is there with you in the midst. And so anybody struggling with anything today, just please know that I'm praying for you. I will never shy away from my faith, as that is the foundation of who I am as a person and who I am as a man. And that's the sole reason of why we've been having success as an organization. The other things that I want to get into briefly is the Officer Down Memorial. I know AJ typically does this, but with him being gone today, I'm going to pick it up. I'm not going to go line by line as far as acknowledging the officers that have fallen in the line of duty by name. But what I will do today is I will tell you that we are at 21 on the year. So it is March 1st today, the day of our recording, and we have lost 21 officers in the line of duty. We've lost 8 by gunfire. We've lost 10 through vehicle-related accidents, and then we've lost 3 others. And those others could be anything from a heart attack while on duty, who knows. But my heart goes out to those families of the officers that lost their life in the line of duty, because I can only imagine how difficult that is. And so, if you guys ever need anything, if you ever need prayer, if you are the victim or the one that was left behind by an officer that was killed in the line of duty, please reach out to me. And at the very least, we'll give you some prayer. And if you need some help financially, I would definitely do whatever I can to make that happen, to make things a lot easier for you. Trying to think if I've covered all the current events. This is like the weirdest thing. I feel like I'm talking to myself. So this is the weirdest thing, but it's all good. Moving right down the Yellow Brick Road. So what would I like to do now? What I like to do now is I like to move right into the question and answers, because I do want to spend some time with each question that's been sent over to me. The reason that is because a lot of times people have questions on, certain things regarding law enforcement and how to navigate through the process or whatever it may be. So I don't want to cheat you guys because, I'm just, rumbling right along. And so the first question that I'm going to get into today is this, and let me pull it back up. So the first question is, what is your take on how police are represented in the media? So that's a pretty deep question. And the reason that's a deep question is because, one of the things we always look at as, people in general is the media giving us a fair shake when it comes to reporting, the right news and the wrong news. And so to answer that question, one of the reasons I've been successful as an organization is because, I like to be as honest as I can be. Now, I want you guys to realize is that even though I may be honest, it doesn't necessarily mean that, some of the information I may give out may be 100% correct all the time, because, sometimes after I give information out, I may receive new information and I may find out that the information was different than the way I first perceived it. And so because of that, I don't want people to believe that, if I gave something that wasn't factual, to think, all of a sudden Ryan's not, he's not accurate and he's not factual, and therefore I'm going to discount him on anything else he says. We're all human beings. We all make mistakes. And so that being said, does the media fairly represent all industries? And for this specific podcast, we're going to talk about law enforcement. Well, I don't necessarily think they do. Now, are there some media outlets out there that do fairly represent all people? 100% there are. Over the last couple of years, I've gotten to know some journalists that are really good friends of mine, really, really good people. And I know that they have a desire to fairly report the news as they get it. But if I'm going to call a spade, like I always say, we have to realize that there are some networks out there that do like to, stay to the left or stay to the right. And their agenda, their narrative is always going to be slanted towards the left or the right. They're not going to deliver that news in the middle. And I think that's what we need to get to more as a society, is we need to be able to deliver news in the middle and understand that, hey, sometimes we may share or disseminate information that one side is not going to want to hear. But if this is what's honest and true, I still have to disseminate that information just as much as disseminating the information that I know may make me look good. And so I think that's one fallacy as a society, is that we want to do what's going to please people. We're in the people pleasing business, and we can't always be in the people pleasing business, because we got to recognize that we can't please everybody. And that's a hard lesson I've had to learn as a person in general, because if you look at some of the Tillman takes I do, if you look at some of the Tillman tips I give, if you look at some of the experience I've given, I always will have people say negative stuff. Now, I would tell you, majority of the feedback that I get is nothing but positive. But if you go on my Instagram right now and look at some of the Tillman takes I've done in the past, you will always have somebody that will respond in a negative manner. If I said that the sky was blue blue, you're going to have somebody come back and say, no, the sky is black, and this is why I think the sky is black. And so because of that, you can't be afraid to not be able to please everybody. And I think that's what some of the news agencies do, is they're worried about pleasing they're worried about pleasing a certain party. They're worried about pleasing Democrats. They're worried about pleasing Republicans. They're worried about pleasing independents. They're worried about pleasing black people. They're worried about pleasing white people. They're worried about pleasing Asian people. You name it. We're so worried about pleasing everybody, but we can't always be worried about pleasing people. We have to be worried about doing the right thing when the right thing matters. And so that's kind of my response to that question when it comes to does the media fairly represent police? In some cases they do, in some cases they don't. I wish I can say they do every single time, but the reality of it is they don't. Moving on to the next question. What are some things you think can be done to bring more positive outlooks to the media? Well, there's a lot of different things that can be done to bring more positive outlooks to the media. And just like police work, we can't always be so quick to criticize and throw the media under the bus either. One of the cop-outs that we like to do sometimes is say, hey, it's the media's fault for painting, police officers to look so bad. Well, it's not the media's fault. Sometimes it's the officer's fault. Sometimes the officer did something they shouldn't have been doing, and because they did something they shouldn't have been doing and it was caught on tape and the media put it out there, well, hey, you know what? Guess what happens? We look bad as a profession. It's not always the media's fault. The media is going to put information out, as soon as they receive it. Now, should that matter? Yeah, it sucks sometimes because it makes us look bad. But at the same time, you got to realize they all have a job to do just as much as we do. And so to go back to the question is, can there be more things done to, put positive stuff out there? I do like to see positive news. And I do think that, but I love to see positive news. But the reality of it is that negative news sells, unfortunately. Think about it. Anytime you see something negative on TV, that's the stuff that draws traction. Not to say that positive stuff doesn't draw traction, because when I did my dancing video, that thing got a lot of steam. When Shelby, and shout out to Shelby from New Jersey, and I'm gonna tell you guys her story in a little bit, but shout out to Shelby for recreating my dance video. When she did that thing went viral. So I don't want to say it here and say that positive stuff doesn't go viral, doesn't get traction, but I will say I see a lot more negative stuff on Instagram and on the media more than I do positive stuff. And you got to realize that sometimes negative stuff sells. It just sells more. And we have to call ourselves to the table as human beings and say, what are we feeding? Like, why are we watching all this stuff on Real Star Hip Hop? Why am I resharing certain negative things if it's not a teaching moment? Those are all things that we have to ask ourselves the question. And then ultimately we have to ask ourselves, am I a part of the problem or am I a part of the solution? So are there more positive things that we can do as a profession or or that the media can do to put positive stories out? 100%. We can always move forward and get better. But I will say that the media is trying their best to put a lot of positive stuff and a lot of positive content out there. What's the next question? So what is one thing you wish would change about media reportings of police activity? That's a big one, and that's an important one because one of the things we have to understand is that police officers are human beings and police officers have families. And so I know that a priority for a lot of news agencies is that they want to get the information out there first, because, if there's a story, we have to be the ones to get it out there first. But you got to realize that, there's a lot of privacy. There's a lot of confidentiality that goes into not only the officer's family, but the victim or whoever else was involved in that situation. And so because of that, we have to be very, very careful on putting stuff out there so quickly without gathering all the facts and without, or with considering the people involved in that situation. Here's a good example of that, and it's not police related. It's actually Kobe Bryant related. So there was actually an article that I just read today about how, I guess it was law enforcement officers shared the pictures from the crash with other people in a bar. And so Vanessa Bryant, his wife, is devastated after hearing that because, that was the last thing they wanted was pictures to be, shared with other people from a scene that was probably horrific. And so, as human beings, I don't know what it is. I don't know what inclination it is inside of us that makes us want to see gory stuff or see, crazy stuff. But we have an inkling to do it. But yet sometimes that inkling gets in the way of, having empathy for the person that's experiencing that tragedy. And that's a prime example. And so if we have to ask ourselves the question, what can we do, or, what could the media do to do things better when it comes to reporting police activity? Be sensitive to what occurred and what happened in that situation. I know you want to get that story out there quickly. I know your boss wants you to get out there as quickly as possible, but we got to be careful, because there's a lot of people. Because think about this. I'm married and I have 3 kids. You guys all know that if you listen to the podcast, and I'm pretty open with you guys about who I am as a man. But let's say that I went and did something, I got in a police shooting tomorrow, and let's say I was justified in everything, but let's say the police video looks very, very bad. Now, if you guys know anything about my son, based on hearing from this podcast, you guys know my oldest son loves police officers. Like, he's a super fan of police officers. He wants to be one and everything like that. Well, let's say there's news media covering this, horrific shooting that happens, and it looks bad, even though it was justified. And, they have this video being blasted all over the news at night. And my son is up at night watching the TV, and you have a lot of people yelling at his dad, or, calling his dad a pig, calling his dad the man, or whatever it may be, saying that, the only good cop is a dead cop. Let's say my son is watching all of this on TV without knowing all the facts. What do you think my son is going to think? You know what I mean? What do you think my wife is going to think? And so a lot of times we do things without thinking about the other people that are really going to suffer from it. It may not be me that suffers from it. Like, if somebody told me that I was a pig, or called me all sorts of names, or whatever it may be, I don't really care, because, I realize I'm confident in my own skin to know that what you say about me is not going to affect how I feel. However, I can affect how my wife and my kids feel. And so that's what we have to realize, when it comes to disseminating information and sensitive content, is who else is going to be affected by this. And that's very, very hard. The other thing I want to talk about, or the other question that I have, this is the last question I have from my buddy's wife, is can you explain what Breaking Barriers United is and what the mission is? So if you guys aren't familiar with Breaking Barriers United, if you guys are new to the podcast, you guys know that, or if you don't know, Breaking Barriers United is an organization that was founded for the sole purpose of bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community. Most of you guys know my story. I was not a fan of police officers before I became one. I had bad experiences with police officers. I have family members that have had bad experiences with police officers. And so when I became a police officer, I saw things way differently. I understood why officers do what they do. I got to see, a glimpse behind the scenes, and I actually became the guy that I once despised. And so when I saw that, and when I start seeing the way things are really done, I had a burning desire in my heart to go out there and change the way people perceived law enforcement. And so over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, I've created an organization where I speak out at many schools, changing the perception on how people view police officers, getting people to understand the person behind the badge. Some of the other things that have spawned from that is we also put on after school programs where I have officers that go and teach, some of our students in the schools about law enforcement, but also, the career and technical education world, so that way they can better themselves. Some of the other things that we've been doing, we've held conferences, but one of the biggest things that we're going to be getting into soon is helping people get hired into law enforcement. One of the things I always say is that I am dedicated to changing the face of modern day policing. And what does that mean, quite frankly? Well, there's a guy by the name of Sir Robert Peel, and if you look him up, he was alive in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they called him the father of modern day policing. Well, that was late 1800s and the early 1900s, and if he was the father of modern day policing, then we're definitely in need for a facelift to the profession. And so I'm dedicated to giving the profession a facelift, allowing, people to see a different side of law enforcement, and allowing people to realize the necessity of law enforcement. But I do it in a unique way, and I do it because I recognize that not all police officers are good. And that's a harsh reality that every single one of us have to come and grasp, is that, not all police officers do the right thing. Some officers go out there and make bad mistakes. Some officers, go out there and unethical, immoral. Some officers are, taking people's lives unjustifiably. And so I have to be able to acknowledge the right just as much as, or the wrong just as much as I acknowledge the right. And so that's what I'm dedicated to doing. And have I taken criticism and have I taken heat for doing it? Yes, I have. But there's no influential person that I know of that didn't take heat for what they did as they were trying to change the world. So that's what Breaking Barriers United is. That's what our mission is, and that's what we're going to continue to do in order to improve and change the face of modern day policing. So now what I would like to do is I'd like to transition. I hope I was able to answer those questions from my buddy's wife thoroughly. If not, we'll have to do a retake. But now what I'd like to do is I'd like to move into a few questions that I have received from some of the members of our Instagram account and other social media platforms. The first question that I got, and this is a big one because I've been recently asked this a lot. And not just from people on social media, but from people at my presentations, you name it. But that question is, what do I do if I get pulled over by the police? What do I do on a traffic stop? And this is a good question. And for some people, unfortunately, it may seem like it's common sense, but you have to realize it is not common sense. If you've never been pulled over by the police, how would you know what to do if nobody's ever trained you or taught you to do what you should do? And so what I would like to do is I'm going to give you a step-by-step, process of what you should do. So, if a police officer gets behind you and you see him get behind you, a lot of times we start to get that white knuckle clench on the steering wheel. And what that means is you're clenching that steering wheel so hard that your knuckles start to turn white because you're getting nervous and you don't know what's about to happen. And so as that happens, you're starting to sweat and everything. And you're like, oh my goodness, I'm about to get pulled over. Some people have been pulled over enough to say, hey, look, I know I'm getting pulled over right now. As soon as you get pulled over, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you start the process of getting over to the right side of the roadway, so that way you can yield. Now, if you're on a freeway, it's a little bit harder because sometimes the freeways are moving fast. So what I would say, and I can't speak specifically on this one as much just because I'm not a highway patrol officer. And if there's a highway patrol officer out there that is, following us and wants to give more insight onto this question, please feel free to leave a comment. But what I will say, though, is if you can on the freeway, try to get off of the nearest exit if you can. Just because if you get off the nearest exit, then not only is it going to be safer for you, but it's also going to be safer for that officer. Now, if you're on a highway in some Timbuktu town where there's no exits or anything, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to get over quickly as quickly as possible. But make sure the area that you choose to get over to, make sure make sure there's room on the side of the road, because the last thing you want to do is you want to be put out in the middle of the roadway. Now, if you're on a city street, pull off on the side of the roadway if you can. Make sure it's like, there's not a lot of cars. There's not going to be a lot of traffic, that's going to be, right on your driver's side door. If it avails, pull into the nearest parking lot. The last thing you want to do, though, I will tell you, is you do not want to keep driving for minutes upon minutes upon minutes to try to find the perfect place to park. Because what's going to happen is if you're driving and a police officer pulls you over, or at least lights you up to pull you over, and you just keep driving for several minutes upon minutes, well, that officer, what do you think he's going to start to think? He's going to start to think that you're not yielding right away, and he might think he's in a pursuit. And so you gotta be careful on making sure that you're gauging, how long it's taking you to pull over. Like I said, you want to be safe. You want to pull over to the most safest place possible, but at the same time, you don't want to continue to look for the most safest place. And now that officer thinks that he's in a pursuit, because believe it or not, as soon as that person doesn't yield to me after a few minutes of me, traveling behind them, then I might start to think that, hey, look, I'm in pursuit. What officers will typically do, though, if you're not pulling over when they want you to, a lot of them will get on the PA and say, hey, pull over to the right side of the roadway. So it might be wise for you to at least roll those windows down too when you're getting pulled over. So that way, if he does get on his PA or his intercom, now you can hear the directions he's saying. Because if he's telling you to pull over to the right side of the roadway, well, you know what? You need to start following those directions, because the last thing you want to do is, be in a situation where the officer's saying, hey, he's not following directions or she's not following directions. So once you get pulled over, what do you do after that? Well, one of the things that I like for common practice is to roll all the windows down. The reason I would like you to roll all the windows down is because now, as an officer, as I walk up, I can see who's in that vehicle. You got to realize that when we do traffic stops on people, we don't know who we're pulling over 9 out of 10 times, especially if it's in the dark. But if it's in the dark and you have tinted windows, there's no way I would be able to know who's in that vehicle. So if there's a person in that vehicle that wants to do harm to an officer, they can hide behind the window tint, and they can hide and lay down in the back seats, do whatever they want to do. And so, you got to realize we're going to respond, in a tactful manner to make sure that we can have some type of advantage. But if those windows up, it makes things a lot more complicated, because now you have the officer trying to guess who's back there as opposed to you just revealing, hey, look, there's nobody back here. And even if you do have passengers in the back seat, hey, roll those windows down. At least once the officer rolls up, at least all the windows are down. He can see inside. And then that way, once he sees inside, he kind of starts to say, look, okay, on his threat level, okay, it may not be, at least there's kids back here, whatever it may be. I know there's people back here. Maybe he might stop a little bit shorter so that way, or further back so that way he doesn't have to cross the line of view of the people in the back seat. But it just helps the officer out in so many different ways when you roll the windows down. Once all the windows are rolled down, put your hands on the steering wheel. The reason we want you to put your hands on the steering wheel is because every time, as long as we can see your hands, I know that even if there is a weapon in the car, as long as I can see them, I know you're not reaching for that weapon. And so it is a very, very good practice to at least put your hands on the steering wheel. I've actually seen some people, when I pull them over, if they have passengers in the vehicle, they'll put their hands on the front seat or they'll put their hands on the dashboard. Yeah, it may seem a little bit dramatic, and I've heard people say, oh, I have rights and this and that. I should be able to do what I want to do. Yeah, you're right, but you got to understand something, that an officer that's pulling you over has no clue of who he's walking up to, and he has no clue on what he's going to be dealing with when he's walking up to that car. And so by putting your hands up on the steering wheel or on the front seat or the seat in front of you or on the dashboard, you're now telling the officer, okay, hey, look, I recognize you pulled me over. I'm putting my hands where you can see them, so that way I don't give you any type of inclination that I might be trying to reach around for something. Once you put your hands on the steering wheel or wherever you put them up so that way the officer can see them, at that point in time, let the officer ask you to do whatever he needs you to do. Let the officer tell you, hey, do me a favor and grab your registration. If your registration is in the glove box, tell the officer, hey, officer, my registration is in the glove compartment, and then he will proceed to tell you, okay, go ahead and grab it for me. If he says, hey, let me see your license, tell him, okay, officer, no problem. I'll let you see my license. However, my license is in my wallet, which is in my back pocket, or my license is in the center console. Let him know like where it's at before you move there. Just don't start reaching around. A lot of times people start reaching around for stuff. And again, if the officer doesn't know what he's up on, for all he knows, you can be reaching around for a wallet and ID, or you can be reaching around for a gun and you're trying to shoot him. And so that's why it's so important to let the officer give you direction on what he or she would like you to do before you make that action. After he gives you whatever questions or whatever requests to do, fulfill that request by, giving him your license, registration, insurance, whatever it may be, and then just wait until he gives you another direction. The other thing I would like to tell you is, I know sometimes we like to argue. It's just a human reaction to argue with an officer. If you feel like you weren't in violation of whatever he's pulling you over for, if you feel like you weren't in violation of speeding, whatever it may be, we like to argue. You do have the right to tell the officer, hey, sir, I don't think I was speeding, or hey, sir, I think I stopped. You have every right to tell the officer that. If you feel like you didn't break the law, then please let him know. But you got to realize, don't keep going back and forth with the officer. If the officer is going to give you a ticket, the officer is going to get you a ticket. It's very, very hard to talk yourself out of an officer that's going to give you a ticket. But you got to remember, the time to argue with an officer is not the time to stop. The time to argue with an officer is court. And so, there are a lot of times that officers will let people go. Officers do have discretion to let people go on every single traffic stop, but you don't want to get into, a back and forth bantering, whether or not you deserve the ticket or you don't deserve it, or you do deserve the ticket, because you got to realize that officer's out there on the street with traffic passing them. You're out there on the street. If there's a drunk driver that comes up behind your vehicle and collides into you, because you guys are just sitting out on the roadway for an extended amount of time, those are all things that could occur, and we want to try to avoid all of that. And so after all of that's said and done, once the officer tells you what the violation was, he's either going to give you a ticket or not. If he gives you the ticket, just sign it, and then he'll tell you, what you can do after that in order to fight it or in order to take care of it. And then at that point in time, once the officer releases you, make sure you pull into traffic safely, activate your blinker, make sure the roadway is clear before you proceed into the middle of the roadway, and then go on about your business. So those are just a few of the basic pointers to doing on a traffic stop. If you are carrying a firearm in a vehicle, one of the things I like to know as a police officer, I like to know if you have a firearm in the vehicle. The reason that is because if I know there's a firearm, then hey, at least I know it's not going to be a surprise if I so happen to see it while you're grabbing something. Because let's say like you don't tell the officer that you have a firearm in the vehicle and you go to grab something. Let's say that you open the glove compartment and the officer sees a handgun in there. Well, now that you may look back and see an officer, drawing down on you because now all of a sudden he feels that you're trying to hide the fact that you're carrying a weapon. If you tell the officer, hey, sir, or hey, ma'am, I have a registered firearm in the vehicle. It's in the glove compartment. It's in the trunk, wherever it may be, whatever state you live in. I don't know what the different gun laws are for carrying, but just let them know, hey, look, there is a gun in the vehicle. So that way there's no surprises. Don't start reaching around for stuff, because if you start reaching around for stuff, especially if the officer knows you have a gun in the car and you start reaching around without him telling you to do so, you might find yourself in a dangerous situation. So those are, like I said, those are just a few of the things that I can offer as far as my own experience of doing traffic stops with people. May I have missed some things potentially, and if I miss some things, if you're an officer out there, also add to this information so that way, people know exactly what to do and what not to do on a traffic stop. So moving right down the road, to some of the other questions. I got another question here that says, was the background process stressful? So if you're a police officer out there or aspiring police officer, and you're trying to get hired and you're in the background process, the background process could be very, very stressful. And the reason it could be stressful is because a lot of times what the agency that's hiring is trying to do is they're trying to figure out who you are as a person. And some of the things in order to do that have to be accomplished are, we have to go talk to people that know you. We have to talk to people that you grew up with. We have to talk to your teachers. We have to talk to police officers that may have pulled you over, whatever it may be. And so that's going to require you going back into your history to gather all that information. And so the reason it's so stressful is because you have to look back at your whole life and see what's pertinent information that that these people need to know. And so, for example, like when I was in the process, I had probably lived in about 6 or 7 different residences by the time I had got hired or I was in the hiring process with law enforcement. And so I had to go back and track every single address that I lived at. I had to track my landlords down. And then if you move on to education, I had to go get transcripts. And then the other part that makes the background process so stressful is, what are people saying about you? People are going to be getting, what are they called? References in the mail that you have to fill out. And so you're like, man, I hope they're saying the right things. And so that can be stressful because you don't know what they're going to say about you. And then the other thing is a lot of times in the background process, you may not hear back from the law enforcement agency right away. So initially you'll hear from them pretty frequently because they're going to be asking you for certain things. Hey, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. But after they have all that information, you don't hear from them for a while. And it's not because they don't want to talk to you. It's not because, they're about to disqualify you. A lot of times it's just because they're out and about trying to, go do, door knock your house or go door knock your neighbor's house or, fly to whatever state you used to live in. So that way they can get as much information as possible. And so, my best advice for that is, if you have not heard from your background investigator, don't start blowing up their phone trying to get a hold of them saying, hey, what's going on? Where am I at with the process? Because you got to realize not only are they doing your background, but they're probably doing the background of a whole bunch of other people out there as well. And so the background process could be very stressful, but like they always say, no news is good news. So if you don't receive any news right away from your background investigator, don't start panicking just yet, just because you might hear back from them sooner than later to let you know what the next step of the process will be. And now I think there's one other question I wanted to answer. Where are we at on time, Billy? 42 minutes. This is hard, guys. It is hard. If you guys have never done this before, to do a podcast, by yourself, it is very hard. And if you guys didn't hear, the Savage has re-entered the building. I told him that you were gone. I need you to edit in the All By Myself song and some cricket sound effects, because I was all by myself when I first started this podcast. But it's very hard doing a podcast by yourself. So, Billy, Bianca had a question, and can you give me that question, because I want to answer that?
Yes, it was, why are police and military trained differently? So why are they trained differently, and do you think they should be trained differently? Why or why not?
Good question. So the question was, why are police and the military trained differently? And should we be trained the same or should we be trained differently? Well, the short answer to that, and I'm not a tactician by any means, so I don't want some of you guys to take the next words that come out of my mouth and be like, who is this Ryan guy thinking he's a tactician? Now, I am not a tactician, but I do have training experience just from, tactics, on a patrol level and stuff like that. You got to realize that, when training for war is a lot different from training domestically, meaning like here in the States and, going to certain types of calls for service. A lot of times when you're going to war, for a fact that you're going to into battle with an enemy. Like, as soon as you cross a certain line that there are enemies out there that you are going to have to, go to war with. And so because of that, you're going to train a lot differently because you almost have that mindset of, hey, I'm going out with a mission and my mission is to get home safely, but my mission is also to go, destroy or capture the target, whatever it may be. And so having that mindset, you may be moving a lot faster. You may be looking for certain things that we wouldn't be doing as a police officer on patrol, where as a police officer on patrol, you got to realize that we're in the public service industry. And this is like one of the best lines that everybody likes to give us. Oh, I pay your taxes. You're a servant. You're supposed to serve me. And this is that. And you know what? As a matter of fact, you're absolutely correct. I am a public servant. I am there to serve you. And so, although I may carry, an assault rifle in my car, although I may carry a handgun on my hip, although I may carry knives and things like that, when I show up to your house, I'm there to serve you, and I want to serve you in the most nonviolent way possible. I want to be able to go home and make sure I can answer your questions and solve your problem as best as I can. But you also have to realize, though, is that unfortunately, domestically, there are people that want to do harm to other people, whether it's police officers or whether it's just other people in general. There are people out there, and we don't always know who those people are. I actually just watched a video the other day, and I'll probably do a Tillman take on this one, where there's a guy that walks into, I think it's his place of work, and he has a handgun in his hand. And so as soon as he walks in, he shoots a round off into the ceiling, and he tells his employees, or his former employees, because I would imagine he was fired the moment that round went off, he tells his former employees to call the police. And so they call the police, rightfully so. And he just stands there and waits for the officers to show up. He stands there and just chills. He's not pointing the gun at anybody else in the building. All he's doing is just waiting with the gun. He's actually, you can see him on the surveillance video, just like kind of just looking around, just chilling. As soon as the first two police officers arrive on scene, they go into the building and the gunfight is on. This guy ambushes them and starts to shoot at them as they turn the corner. And so now the officers have to respond to that very quickly and rapidly and try to stop that threat. Meanwhile, there's still other people in that establishment that are now innocent bystanders. And so why do I bring that story up? I bring that story up to say this, is that as a police officer, we're there to serve you. We want to help you to the best of our ability, but we may not necessarily know who's out there to harm us or do harm to other people. And so that's why we have to train tactically. So on one end, we as officers are trained to talk to people. We're trained to de-escalate situations. We're trained to, figure out, and solve problems that have nothing to do with criminality sometimes. But at the same time, we're also trained to stop threats. And that's by use of, force sometimes, and also by use of deadly force sometimes. So I hope that answers the question to the best of, my ability. I know, like I said, I was never in the military, so I don't want to speak too much on how they train. I will tell you, though, that there are a lot of police officers that are former military people. And a lot of times those former military that are in the law enforcement profession, a lot of those people are the same ones that are actually training police officers now to, work on tactics. And a lot of tactics that we use in police work is consistent with military training. So I don't want to sit here and say that military and police training are completely different, because they're not. There are a lot of similarities in the way we train, especially our SWAT teams and the way they clear buildings and handle stuff. There's a lot of similarities there, but there's also a lot of differences. So hope that answered that question. This is actually going to be a shorter episode too, just so y'all know, because to keep going. Where are we at right now? 48, man, that's impressive. So let me see if there's any other questions before I wrap this thing up. I have a buddy of mine. He also works with me. He sent me some questions. These are pretty funny. He said, you better answer these questions. Actually, I'm not even going to answer them because They're pretty funny. But there was another question that I got. What's my favorite kind of donut? My favorite kind of donut, I like the cherry donuts, like with the cherry frosting on. Those are good. Or if you go to Krispy Kreme's, they got this strawberry shortcake donut. Whoo-wee. If you guys want a good donut, go find you a Krispy Kreme donut tonight and do that. How many pair of Jordans do I own? So, and then what was your first pair? So currently, I don't own as many Jordans as you guys think I do. I know it seems like it because every single time you guys see a video of me, I'm wearing Jordans. I do that for a specific reason. I don't own as many as you think I do. I think I own about 7 to 8 pairs of Jordans, I think. And the first pair, my recent Jordans that I got was my Jordan 11 72 and 10s. I can't tell you the first pair of Jordans I got when I was a little kid because that was so long ago. But I had a few pair of Jordans when I was younger. So I do own, about 7 to 8 pairs of Jordans. That's not a lot compared to some of the sneakerheads out there. There are some sneakerheads out there that own a lot of Jordans. And so I'm not that guy. So that being said, guys, I think I want to wrap it up. I know there's a few other questions out there, but my voice is starting to hurt a little bit and I got to speak tomorrow twice. But again, I want to just thank you guys so much for all your support. I want to give you guys some last words of encouragement before we end this podcast. And so if you guys haven't seen the video that I posted about a week ago on my social media account, I posted a video of a little girl. Her name is Shelby. Shelby lives in New Jersey. And Shelby saw the dancing video I did at Don Lugo High School when I first left there to go to a new assignment. And so when she saw that video, I think Shelby's 9 or 10 years old. When she saw that video, I guess it inspired her so much so that she wanted to recreate the dance. And so she recreated that dance. And boy, when I tell you she recreated it, like she did that dance way better than me, if you ask me. Like she killed it. And she's like spot on. So I had the Savage edit the video and he put it side by side. And you can see how spot on she is with this dance. But that's not the cool part of the story. I mean, that is a cool part of the story, but the most inspiring part of the story is this. Shelby's mom had emailed me and basically told me a short summary of Shelby's story. So Shelby was adopted from, I want to say it was China or Japan. It was in Asia. It was a country in Asia. Is that right? Yeah, it was a country in Asia, I think. Don't make fun of me, y'all. And I got a fair foul on the way. Remind me of the fair foul, Billy. But anyways, she was adopted and at a young age. And when she was adopted, her bladder was born on the outside of her body. And so when her new parents adopted her, they, obviously, had to assume the role of mom and dad and treat their baby girl for her medical issues. And so Shelby had went through a numerous amount of surgeries to repair her bladder, you know what I mean? So that way they can medically or restructure her body so that way it's what's inside of her. And so she went through this whole process all as a young girl. And her mom said, she never cried. She always was a trooper and has never gotten bogged down by any of the whole process. And so one of the issues, I guess, that the residual issues that she has now is that she can't control her bladder like, a normal person can. And so, when she did that video and like her mom was like, I never even knew that she can dance to hip hop. And her mom was like, she doesn't really go off for dance teams and stuff like that just because, the whole situation wearing leotards and, some of her medical issues, she's just never thought about it. So when she saw the hip hop or the Me Do That Dance video and she saw her daughter dancing to hip hop, it actually got her mom's wheel spinning and saying, hey, look, maybe my daughter can go out for the hip hop team. Now when I heard that story, it just inspired me so much because it just reminded me on how much we deal with as human beings. And sometimes we're at a spot in our life where we feel like we can't go on or we feel like, I just want to give up. But I want you guys to continue. I want you to press forward. Everything in life happens for a reason. And I know it sounds so cliche sometimes, but it's so true. I read a book by Tony Evans called Pathways, and it talks about, providence, and sovereignty and God's sovereignty in our lives and the providence. And what providence is that providence is everything happens for a reason. That's what providence is. That's what the definition of it is. A lot of times people like to call it luck. A lot of times people like to, say, hey, it happened by chance. There is no such thing as luck. There is no such thing as chance, at least in my life. And what it is it's God's providential hand directing every single step of my life in the way it should go. Now, that doesn't mean that, certain things may not happen, that he may not allow the enemy to do things in our life. If you go to the book of Job, there's a prime example of God giving, Satan permission to, basically mess with Job's life, because Satan had to go through God in order to, get permission to mess with Job. And that is a hard book to read, because you read about how he lost his family, he lost all of his riches, he lost all these things. But at the end of the story, Job never cursed God. He never cursed him. He was upset. He was mad. He was angry with God. But at the end of the story, Job is restored. And I want you guys to realize, wherever you're at in life right now, there is restoration. You just have to believe. You have to have that hope. Everything does happen for a reason. And the reason that may be is because somebody out there may be going through something that's similar to you. Somebody may be going through something that is similar to your story, but worse. And if I don't go through the trials and tribulations that I'm going through, how can I help that other person out that is going through the same thing or a worse situation? And so we have to realize God's providential hand in our life to see that, he's guiding me every step of the way. And so when I met Shelby, Shelby went through what she went through to give another person hope out there. By her doing that video and by our paths crossing, not by luck, but by God's providential plan, she is giving somebody hope through me, through the message that I'm putting out on this podcast right now. And so that's a prime example of how we all go through things for a reason, and that nothing happens by chance. And so I want to really just give you guys hope out there to continue to do what you guys are doing. And if you guys do need prayer, reach out to me and I will pray for you, because I know life is not easy. God never said it was going to be easy, but God did say that he would give us peace in the middle of a storm. And so I just want to give you guys that as a small encouragement. And so last thing, what I want to do is I want to leave you guys on a fair or foul today. It's pretty funny. I don't have AJ here, and I'll probably bring this up when AJ's back on the podcast. But when Billy and I, so we're flying out to Michigan last week, and as we're on the plane, we had a layover in Chicago. And so when we're flying into Chicago, I'm looking out the window of the plane, and I just see this large body of water. And I'm like, man, and Billy's laughing because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm looking at the window, and I'm like, man, there's like a lot. I'm thinking like, man, that's a lot of water. So I'm like, man, I didn't realize there was oceans in like Chicago or whatever. I'm like, man, that's crazy. So I'm talking to Billy. I'm asking Billy, and I'm trying to be whispering, right? I'm like whispering to Billy because I don't want people all in my business just in case I do look stupid, which I end up looking stupid. Well, whatever. I didn't want to be stupid, so I'm whispering to him like, hey, bro, I didn't know Chicago had oceans and stuff like that. And foul on Billy's half, because Billy, he didn't lead me in the right direction either. He wasn't like, nah, bro, this is what it is. So anyways, I guess the guy in front of us hears me or our conversation going on, and the first thing he says is he's like, hey, you guys must be from the West Coast, huh? And I'm like, and so me and Billy just start laughing. I'm like, oh, well, why so? How do you know that? And he's like, well, because that's not an ocean, my brother. He was like, that's Lake Michigan right there. And I'm like, oh, that's Lake Michigan? I was like, man, that looks like a freaking ocean. So fair or foul that the man in front of us should have just minded his own business, or is it fair that he was actually trying to help a brother out? Because I didn't know what the heck I was looking at. I didn't know what the heck I was talking about. But he definitely was all in me in the Savages conversation, because I know I was whispering. And so, I don't have nobody here to laugh with me. I'm going to need the sound effects of crickets again, Billy, because nobody else is here. But yeah, so that was a funny experience, man. And Billy and I had a great time. So shout out to you guys. Again, Brendan, I want to give you one last shout out for bringing us out to Michigan. Melissa, I want to give you one last shout out to bringing us out to Oakland. Shelby, I want to give you a shout out, sweetheart, for doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. You really inspired me to continue to move our organization forward. If you guys would like me to come out to speak to your organization, please just email me at info@breakingbarriersunited.com. That's how Melissa got a hold of me. That's how Brendan got a hold of me. And every other person that I'm speaking for, that's how they all get a hold of me. They usually just email me at info@breakingbarriersunited.com. And just hit me up. We can make it happen, so I can come out to your organization and hopefully change the culture and environment wherever you may be at. Also, if you guys love this podcast, continue to give us a 5-star rating, and don't just give us 5 stars, but leave a review. The reviews is how we know, whether or not we're spot on with our content or whether or not we need to improve on our content. I will tell you though, you better not leave this episode a 1-star review, because if you do, I'm firing everybody, because I'm going to know that y'all don't like me. You guys just tune in for AJ. I want y'all to give this like the best rating ever. I want this episode to get 10,000 downloads in and of itself, so that way I can just, flex on AJ, because he's all hype because he has over 100,000 followers on Instagram and over 1 million followers on TikTok. So please leave us a review, guys. This podcast is being brought to you guys by the one and only Breaking Barriers United. Thank you for all of our team out there that's doing what they do, and thank you for those that made it possible. We have a studio now, so what we'll probably do is I'll probably put pictures of the studio on our Instagram account if you guys are curious to see what it looks like. So that being said, I love you guys. If you guys need prayer, reach out to us, DM me, do whatever you guys need to do. Appreciate you guys. Stay strong, keep the hope, keep the faith, because whatever you're doing, I'm sure you're in the right direction. God will be with you every step of the way. God bless you guys, and we'll see you guys next week.